In this clip, I'll walk you through the 2021 Rossum SP1200. For best viewing, I recommend watching the clip on a laptop or larger display such as a TV, etc. Put the clip in full screen mode and set the resolution to 1080p via the settings widget down on the bottom right. If you learned something new, give it a like, subscribe, and if you're feeling generous, tap the super thanks and shout me a smoothie. Those on Instagram, feel free to drop by for a look at ToneLab. And for any owners needing ready-made sample packs for the SP1200, including the ones used in this video, then visit the sample pack store via tonelab.au. And I might just add, hourly sessions are available for one-on-one drum machine tuition, studio configuration, or troubleshooting, as well as sound design, specializing in all kinds of gear, just like what you'll find here on the channel. Contact me via Facebook or Instagram for details. This tutorial intends to provide you with everything you need to know about using your SP1200. And shout out to STUDIO OOMZ for the generous loan of his new Rossum. The Rossum SP1200 and the original Emu share a lot of similarities. However, there have been some improvements introduced into the Rossum hardware and software, but the majority of this tutorial will also function the same for the Emu. At the core, the SP1200s are 12-bit mono samplers with built-in sequencer, capable of sampling audio at 26,040 samples per second. The Rossum's sample memory can retain as much as 20 seconds, while the Emu, on the other hand, retains as much as 10, and both share the same 2.5 second maximum sample length limit. The most obvious differences that the Rossum has over the Emu, apart from the brand mark and the colour, is that it comes factory shipped with an SD card reader, opposed to the Emu's factory shipped 3.5-inch floppy disk drive. There's also some additional features you'll find on the rear of the unit, which we'll take a look at shortly. But let's start by getting familiar with the features across the top panel. We've got the 4 main sections across the top here, which are referred to as modules. Evidently, setup, disk, sync, and sample. And I'll be walking you through each of these along with the programming and performance modes in this tutorial. Each module has its own menu that you can access by enabling it, followed by punching any number into the keypad to access the relative feature. And these modules have been laid out conveniently so that the sample module is what you'd enable to record audio into the SP1200. The sync module is what you configure to integrate the SP1200 with other external devices in various ways. The disk module is what you use to save or load your sounds and sequences. And for just about everything else, there's the setup module, which is where you'll find various editing features that can manipulate your sounds and configure various operational settings pertaining to the functionality of the SP1200. Along the bottom, we have the iconic 8 pads, along with the 4 banks that you can toggle through using this bank select button, giving you up to a maximum of 32 sounds at any one time. Each pad can contain up to a maximum audio length of 2.5 seconds. But further to that, you are limited to the overall sample memory capacity of the Rossum, which is 20 seconds, or twice that of the original Emu. So you need to be fairly frugal with your samples, otherwise you'll run out of sample memory sooner rather than later. The pads also have their own independent tune and mix settings that you can access by toggling this button here and adjusting the vertical fader above the relative pad. You'll also get a read in the display of where the current levels are, which is handy if you're accessing alternate banks. When tune is lit, you can change the pitch in steps of semitones, 7 semitones up and 8 semitones down. There's also a decay setting you can access by trading in any pad's tune setting for a decay envelope, which allows you to shorten the length of your sound, and we'll visit that in more detail during the setup module section. So moving over to the transport controls of segment mode, which is where you build the parts for your song. You can hit run stop at any time to start and stop the sequencer. and holding down the tap repeat button will re-trigger any pad being held down to the rate set by your AutoCorrect. You've got a 10-digit keypad to punch in values or menu options with, while the 7 and 9 keys respectively can respond to questions that the SP may require a yes/no answer for. You've got your master mix volume pot alongside your metronome volume pot. The metronome level controls the level of metronome in your main mix, but the dedicated metronome output on the rear of the unit isn't affected by its volume pot. This offers the ability to use the metronome output as a means to trigger synthesizers, sequencers, modular gear, and drum machines that are compatible with a 24 pulse per quarter note clock. While we're looking at the rear, let's quickly run through what these other connectors are about. Starting from the bottom left, we have the sample input. Cable up a 1/4" TS jack out of your audio source's output into this jack to record audio into the SP1200. Above that, we have the sample monitor. Unlike the original Emu, on the Rossum, you have a dedicated 1/4" TRS monitor output, so you can monitor the pre-conversion signal coming off the gain amplifier and anti-aliasing filter. Unlike the Emu, the Rossum sample input is fed through to the mix-out, so you can hear what's going into the converter. However, you can disconnect this feed if you insert a jack into the rear monitor output. The mix output is the SP's main output. This and all Rossum channel outputs are balanced 1/4" TRS jacks. Without any output jacks connected, the mix output contains the sum of all filtered outputs plus the monitor output plus channels 7 and 8 and the metronome, which has its own dedicated volume pot. To the right, we have the filtered channel outputs, numbered 1 through 6. These imitate the pairs of filtered outputs found on the original Emu, where the first pair, or channels 1 and 2, applied dynamic filtering with varying bandwidth over time, while pairs 3 and 4 plus 5 and 6 applied static filtering. Each of these, plus channels 7 and 8, will individually disconnect from the mix-out when jacks are inserted into them. Unlike the Emu, the Rossum has independent cutoff frequency and resonant filters on channel outputs 1 and 2, and you can adjust these manually by moving their sliders. Below the 6 filtered outputs are the unfiltered outputs, numbered 1 through 8. The thing to note with these is 1 through 6 will not disconnect from the mix out. And I might just add, about a month prior to this recording, Rossum released firmware version update 1.02, which allows you to disable all the filter envelopes. And the way to disable the filter envelopes is hold down the Tune Mix button as you power on your SP1200. And the message Filter Envelopes Off will display in the LCD as confirmation. Next, we have this set of control jacks, which are all 1/4" TS type. The first being the metronome/clock output, is a dedicated metronome and clock output. As mentioned earlier, this is capable of triggering various synthesizers, drum machines, and other clock-compatible devices. Next to that, we have the SMPTE input/clock input, plus the SMPTE output, which is used for generating SMPTE timecode. The SMPTE input is a multi-purpose jack, capable of receiving SMPTE, among other things. And we'll revisit these in a little more detail during the sync module section. Next, we have 3 Footswitch controllers, which offer some hands-free functionality, and we'll also revisit their purpose towards the end of the tutorial. Next across, we have the 3 common MIDI ports, in, out, and through, for syncing various MIDI devices, as well as triggering individual sounds in or from the SP1200. And there's more about MIDI sync coming up in the sync module section. Last on the rear, some of you may have noticed, the Rossum power supply is now an external 12 volt 5 amp brick that connects to a sturdy 4-pin XLR latchable jack. Overall, the reissue comes nicely presented in this black polished metal frame, opposed to the original Emu's structural foam in plastic casing. And I might add, it's nice under the fingertips, it feels solid, and it's much heavier than the original Emu. So next, let's get into the sample module. So let's take a look at the sample module. Press the red button to enable the module, and the SB will automatically place you into menu option 1, the volume unit mode, where you'll see an LCD interpretation of any incoming audio metering through the lower half of the display. Above that, you might notice a letter followed by a number. This represents the bank and pad number that's poised to receive the sound you're about to record into the SP1200. You can change the bank and pad number you're about to record in by using the Assign Voice function at option 2. You'll notice the LCD now displays sampling, followed by the currently selected bank and pad location. Here you can select any bank and pad of your choice to record into, but if you select a pad that already contains a sound, you'll notice an asterisk to the right, alerting you that there's a sound residing on that particular pad. However, if you're fine with that, hit enter and confirm you're happy to erase the sound by hitting yes on the keypad. Otherwise, press no to continue on browsing for a vacant pad. And if you've found a vacant pad, press enter and you'll be presented with the option to select an output channel. Output channels are representative of the SP's rear output jacks. 1 through 6 possess various filter envelopes that are applied to your sounds as they pass through. Here you can accept the proposed channel output or punch in a new number 1 through 8 via the keypad, then press enter. Then you'll be returned to option 1, the VU mode. So now if you cue some audio, make sure you're cabled up via the rear sample input, and you'll be able to get a read on how loud your incoming audio signal is via the display. You can adjust the level of your input gain by rotating the gain pot here, or if you find you're still not getting enough level, you can use the built-in preamp on board the SP1200 via menu option 3, level. Here you can increase the overall input gain by using the arrow keys up from 0 dB to plus 20 dB or plus 40 dB respectively. I might just add, with the advent of Rossum's continuous input monitoring, the monitoring level can jump substantially when you increase your gain by plus 20 or 40 dB. So you might want to return option 3 to 0 dB when you're done sampling to avoid any loud surprises later in your session. When you've settled on an option, press enter to return to the VU mode. Then use your gain pot to fine-tune your incoming level a little more if need be. And you'll notice the option 3 level setting reflected up in the top right of the display. Before we sample anything, let's quickly run through what the rest of these menu options are, starting with option 4, threshold, which works in conjunction with option 7, arm sampling. And what the threshold does is allows you to set a minimum level tripwire that your incoming audio signal must meet to kickstart the SB into sampling automatically. As instructed via the display, use slider number 1 to adjust your threshold. This can be useful in situations where you want to automatically start recording when a kick comes in, but not before. If you adjust your threshold accordingly, it can ignore the background music and start the sampling immediately when a kick or some other type of peak comes in. The lower half of the display is a VU meter, just like the VU meter found at option 1. So keep an eye on this against your incoming audio and adjust your threshold accordingly. When you've found a sweet spot you're happy with, you can press enter or any other menu option. Next, we have option 5, sample length. Using the first slider, you can adjust the length of your sample down from 2.5 seconds down to 0.1 of a second. In some scenarios, you may only be sampling a rim shot, and this may end up saving you some time trimming your sample later on. So adjust this accordingly and then press enter. At option 6, we have resample. This comes in handy if you're not happy with how the previous sample was recorded. And if that's the case, press option 6, and the SP will use the last recorded bank and pad number along with the previous length to record your next sound. And you'll notice the asterisk, alerting you that this particular bank and pad location is about to be replaced. You can abort this by exiting the sample module or by running option 2, assign voice, to select a different pad. At option 7, we have arm sampling, which is quite the popular option, and as mentioned earlier, arm sampling works in conjunction with threshold. Once your threshold is set, hit 7 via the keypad, and the SP will patiently wait for an incoming audio signal to meet your threshold and kickstart record. And I might add, I don't always use arm sampling, as sometimes it can cut into the beginning of my sample. So if you're finding that arm sampling is butchering the beginning of your samples, then try option 9, which is force sampling. And this is more or less a manual trigger to force the SP into recording the moment you press 9 on the keypad. And finally, I might just mention, for any newbies watching, there's a little bit of an art to sampling, regardless of whichever sampler you're using. If we change the word from sampler to converter for a moment, you can view the concept in a different light, because ultimately the SP1200 is converting sound waves into binary data. But the analog to digital converter inside is ultimately what's doing the magic. So if you're after the perfect sample, aka the perfect conversion, then you'd want to get a nice loud sample, but not distorted nor clipped. And if you push too loud into the SP's converter, you'll probably end up with a crunchy, distorted sample. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, it just won't be a clean thing. So experiment with both, and sometimes just close your eyes and use your ears. So with that aside, let's give this thing something to chew on. Cue the audio, check the gain, then hit option 7 for arm sampling when you're ready. And voila, we've just baked a cake in the SP1200. And the SP1200's happy about it. The LCD reads, sample is good, which is great. So let's hear it. Exit the sample module and tap the pad. Adjust the level. Adjust the tune. Okay, sounds fine. But what if we were to make a different, nastier version of that sample, only this time I'll add an irresponsible amount of additional gain to the same incoming signal. And we can see this time the SP has chosen pad A3 to store the sound. Arm the sample, and away we go. The only difference this time is the SP says sample overload, and that's because we clipped the converter's input ceiling. So let's check this out. Exit the sample module and tap the pad. Yeah, definitely crispier. Anyway, experiment with different amounts of input gain on your incoming audio, because now essentially you're the chef, this is your oven, and that's your temperature. There's a couple of other things about sampling on the SP that I should mention. As you start to fill up the SP's sample memory, your maximum sample length will start to diminish, meaning that the 2.5 second sampling time limit gets shortened as you near and surpass 50% memory capacity. So as a workaround, I suggest recording the longest samples first, as the eroding sample length won't be so troublesome on short samples like snares, closed hi-hats, rim shots, etc. The last thing I'd like to mention while on the topic of sampling is the 2.5 second sample length limit can be quite frustrating for newbies. But there's always little tricks you can do, like play your sample in at twice the speed, then halve the tuning of the sample. Once it's inside the SP1200, essentially this turns the 2.5 second limit into 5 seconds. But you can also get more than that. I've done a clip on this that you can check out via the ToneLab Quick Tips channel, link in the description below. This clip demonstrates how to drive your memory dollar further, which works great on both the Emu and Rossum SP1200s, among other samplers too. And it also adds a little more of that granular sound you might be after. Anyway, next, let's check out the sync module. Enabling the sync module allows you to configure the SP1200 to run along in sync with external devices. By default, the SP powers up with the sync module set to option 1, the internal clock source. While set to the internal clock source, the SP outputs SMPTE timecode via the rear SMPTE output. Via the Metronome output, the SP outputs user-definable and audible clicks while playing segments or songs, plus a constant MIDI clock via the rear MIDI output. If you choose option 2, MIDI, as your clock source, this enables the SP to sync along with an external MIDI device, providing that device can send out a MIDI clock. And if your external device has the ability to send MIDI song position pointer, or SPP, then the SP1200 can follow the location of where the song position is while playing your song or segments. However, some MIDI devices lack the ability to send start and stop messages. So if your SP doesn't run on cue with your external device, try arming the SP's run button prior to starting the external device. Next, at option 3, we have SMPTE, which was originally developed for video production. You can configure the SP to use any one of 4 common frame rates: 24 frames per second, 25, 30, and 30 non-drop. Using the arrow keys, you can select any one of these and then hit enter. But in a nutshell, SMPTE is a digital timecode embedded in an audible tone. And this tone contains frames that are references to absolute time and will run much like a digital stopwatch for as long as you record or generate the SMPTE audio track for. This allows you to forward to any point in your song, and your devices syncing along to SMPTE could catch up to the same hour, minute, second, and even frame position. The only cons to SMPTE is that it doesn't store tempo information, nor can it track changes in tempo, because it's a time-based sync protocol tracking hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, rather than beats per minute. Your SP1200 can write SMPTE timecode via the Setup module's special menu option, number 14, which you can record via the rear SMPTE output into an audio track on your DAW that you can then use to sync your SP1200 or other SMPTE-compatible devices back up to, effectively giving you the option to overdub your SP1200 over the top of itself as many times as your DAW or tape machine or whatever you record to will permit. I might just add, SMPTE is really intended for song mode. However, it can work with segment mode, but if you only have a 2-bar segment, then you may encounter some strange behavior if your SMPTE song position tries to locate a position in time that exceeds the length of your segment. There's a dedicated clip for this over on the ToneLab Quick Tips channel, titled How to Sync the SP1200 via SMPTE, link in the description below. Last in the sync menu, we have Click. This allows you to sync the SP with another SP1200 or even other devices including Lindrums, Oberheims or even the Fairlight, by patching their clock signals into the rear SMPTE input, which also doubles as a clock input. There's a little trick to this though. The clock divisor that you're presented with here divides the incoming clock pulses from devices such as a Lindrum, which puts out 48 pulses per quarter note, or the Oberheim DMX or DX, which outputs 96 ppq, while the Fairlight outputs 384 ppq. And as the SP's click sync counts the rise and fall of each pulse, it essentially counts 2 for every 1. Therefore, you need the divisor to divide the incoming clicks down to the 24 ppq standard that the SP can follow. Or in other words, if the SP is receiving a 96 ppq click signal, then use a divisor value of 8. If you're receiving a 48 ppq signal, which is what can be expected from a Lindrum, then use a divisor value of 4. And if you're receiving a click signal from another 24 ppq device, for example, another SP1200, then a divisor value of 2 is what you'll need. Finally, I'll just mention you'll need to cue the run button for your segments or songs to play when receiving an external click sync. To generate the 24 ppq click signal, make sure your SP1200 is on the internal clock and set your metronome via the panel to click. Now when you play segments or songs, an audible click can be recorded or patched into external devices via the rear metronome/clock output. Next, let's take a look through the disk module. Ultimately, the best way to approach the Rossum disk module is to consider it a floppy disk emulator, and rightly so, because these options, with the exception of option 9, were inherited from the original 1987 Emu SP1200, which came factory shipped with a 3.5-inch floppy drive. So having physical floppy disks in its DNA, the Rossum instead uses virtual floppy disk images, storing them on SD card as image files. The good thing about storing image files is that it gives you the ability to store the equivalent of nearly 5,500 floppy disks on one 8GB SD card, just like the one that ships with the Rossum SP1200. Speaking of which, I'll load it in and browse through the content. While browsing the Rossum SD card, you'll see files and folders, which is a new addition compared with the Emu. But essentially, in terms of the Rossum, image files don't represent singular files, as some may expect, but rather a virtual disk, which is what your sounds and sequences are saved into. With that in mind, you can navigate up and down the directory using the left and right arrow keys. Hold either key down for a moment to automatically scroll through the files and let go to stop. And you may notice some of these titles in the directory end with a / on the right. The / signifies that this is a folder. Hit enter to enter a folder and browse its contents, again using the arrow keys. If you hold down the right arrow, you'll scroll to the bottom where you'll find the exit symbol, which is represented by these 2 dots preceding a /. Hit enter when you see this and you'll be taken back one level, where you could do the same again, or explore other areas of the SD card. If you go back far enough, you won't find any more exits, aka dots preceding a /, and this means you're at the highest level up in your SD card's folder tree, otherwise known as the root directory. Before we whip through the disk menu functions, I'll just quickly mention options 1 and 2 require already existing image files and will not create an image file in the process of saving sounds nor sequences. Essentially, these 2 commands are most useful when saving a progress over sequences or sounds that already exist in an image file. So, as a tip, when starting a new song, use option 9 first. Save all as. This creates an image file, plus there's plenty of storage space for literally thousands of these on your SD card. Then you can use options 1 and 2 respectively to update your sounds or sequences that you just created using option 9. If you're a little apprehensive or unsure what image file you may be saving to, you can back up these files by loading your SD into a computer and saving off your precious images, which I can't recommend enough. With that out of the way, let's whip through the disk menu functions available to you. First up, option 1, save sequences. This is what the SP refers to as songs and segments. Running option 1 via the keypad will save all songs and segments in the SP's memory to an existing image file. If there's any sequences existing in the image file, you'll be prompted about overwriting them, to which you can respond by pressing yes or no via the keypad. In second position, we have Save Sounds, which saves all sounds in the SP's memory to an existing image file. If there's sounds existing in the image file, you'll be prompted about overwriting them, to which again you can respond via the keypad yes or no. Option 3, Load Sequences, clears the contents of the SP's sequencer memory and loads all the sequences from an image file. Option 4 will request a 2-digit segment number that you punch in via the keypad to retrieve a matching numbered segment from within an image file. Option 5, Load Sounds, will clear the contents of the SP's sample memory and load all sounds from an image file. Option 6, Load Sound Number, allows you to load a single sound stored in an image file by its bank and pad ID, unless otherwise named via the setup module's Name Sound function. And if loaded, that sound will acquire the same bank and pad location, but in your current sample memory. Option 7, Catalog Sequences, allows you to scroll through numbered segments contained in an image file using the first fader. Option number 8, Catalog Sounds, allows you to view and scroll through sounds contained within an image file using the first fader. You'll see 3-digit abbreviated file names if you named your sounds. Otherwise, you'll be presented with 2-digit bank and pad IDs of sounds within the image file. Option 9, formerly Format/Copy Software on the Emu, is now Save All As and Rename. This saves all sounds and sequences in the SP's memory into one neat little image file wherever you like. If you want to save this image in a folder, then browse to the folder so the display has it in focus. Then press yes via the keypad. Then provide a meaningful name using the first fader, scroll through letters, numbers and symbols, and using your arrow keys, position the cursor where you'd like to place the next character. Then finally completing the naming process by hitting Enter. In addition to Save All, there's the Rename function residing at the same menu number. To access the Rename feature, run option 9, but this time hit No via the keypad when you're prompted to save all in. You'll then be given the naming dialog where you can use the first fader and arrow keys and dial in a meaningful name. I should also mention you can delete characters by placing your cursor under them and shifting the fader to its lowest position, which is a blank space. Furthermore, you can delete blank spaces by calling up the erase symbol, which is a left pointed arrow with double lines. Position this wherever you need it and press either arrow key to execute it. If you have multiple blank spaces, the erase symbol can take out a series of spaces in one foul swoop. There's also an insert arrow that can insert a space if need be. Alternatively, if you erase all the characters and spaces in the name field, you can then delete the file instead by confirming yes or no via the keypad. And this also works the same for empty folders. Option 0, load sequences and sounds, is a neat little one-touch operation that clears both the sequencer memory and sample memory, then loads all sounds and sequences contained within an image file. And finally, you can create folders on your SD card via the Setup module's special menu option, number 27, Create Folders. If you'd like to create a folder in the root directory, make sure you're looking at nothing else other than a /. If you'd like to place your new folder in an existing folder, just put the display focus on the existing folder. Then hit yes on your keypad and dial in a meaningful name, then finally enter to create the folder. I might just add a couple of important fun facts about the new improved disk module. The Rossum stores the last bank loaded to your SD card, so whichever image file you load via the option 0 command, load all, is written to the SD card and instructs the Rossum to load this again on the next power-up. The Rossum can also read .hfe files, which are denoted in the display by using a superscript H character. .hfe files are created using third-party floppy emulator drives. So if you have a Legacy SP1200 with a Gotek or some other type of emulator, you can load your compatible SP1200 HFE files into the Rossum via the SD card. SD cards are formatted using the FAT32 file system, allowing compatibility between Mac and Windows PCs. The SP1200 images, when viewed on a computer, have a file type suffix of .sp12. For that reason, do the responsible thing and back them up every once in a while, because data loss can really sting. Next, we'll take a look through the Setup module. So let's take a look through the Setup module, which contains a mixed bag of features and functions. Similar to the other modules, these options can be accessed first by stopping the SP1200, although having said that, options 11, 12 and 13 are accessible while recording. You just won't see the LED light on when you enable it, but you might notice the display provides a summary of which options are available while recording. With that aside, let's start from the top, option 11, multi-pitch. This allows you to select any single pad containing a sound, and multi-pitch will provide 8 various tunings of that sound, highest to lowest, across the 8 pads. This can be useful in scenarios where you might want to record a melody with one of your sounds. While multi-pitch is on, you can change the predefined tuning by enabling the tune decay, then moving the faders to new positions, and you'll get a visual via the display of where the current tunings are. You'll notice when in pitch multi-mode, your tune decay LED along with the multi-mode LED remain lit for as long as multi-mode is active. To exit multi-pitch, return to the Setup module and run option 13, exit multi-mode. Then confirm yes or no via the keypad. And in relation to multi-pitch, you have another type of multi-mode at option 12, multi-level. But rather than varying pitches spread across the 8 pads, you have different volume levels. Select any pad, and your sound will be given varying degrees of volume levels across the 8 pads from left to right, lowest to highest. And again, you can customize these levels by toggling the mix function and moving the fader positions to wherever you like. Then again, return to option 13 to exit out of multi-mode. At option 14, we have dynamic buttons. You can toggle dynamic buttons by pressing yes or no via the keypad, and what this does is change the pads from a static velocity to velocity sensitive. Now they'll be able to play out louder or softer, based on how hard you hit the pads. Next on the menu, we have option 15, Define Mix. This is a useful feature because it allows you to store 8 different snapshots of your mix settings, which you can then recall as you wish using option 16, Select Mix. So punch 15 into the keypad, and you'll be prompted to save current mix as mix number. From here, punch in any memory position between 1 and 8, to store your current mix settings, then press enter. To recall a mix, punch in option 16, select mix via the setup menu, and punch in any memory position 1 through 8, then press enter. Now if you visit your mix levels, you should find them where they were saved. And I might add, you can also recall any defined mixes in song mode, which can also be used as basic mix automation, and we'll look into how to do that during the programming section. Next on the menu at option 17 is Channel Assign, which allows you to set each pad's physical output routing. Select any pad and punch any number 1 through 8 into the keypad and repeat. I might add, these channels are single voice monophonic outputs, so use that to your advantage and use them like mute groups, as you can use them to interrupt other sounds using the same channel assignment, which can be handy for closing an open hi-hat with a closed hi-hat. And as mentioned earlier, outputs 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6 possess filtering, which is covered in the rear panel section. As a tip, you might like to check out dynamic voice allocation, which is covered in the special menu section. If you're savvy enough with your channel assignments and dynamic voice allocation, you can create the impression there's more going on than just 8 channels. Next, we have option 18, Decay/Tune Select, which gives you the option to trade any pad's tune setting in for a basic decay envelope that you can adjust using its relative fader. I should mention that a pad can't have tune and decay settings at the same time. It's one or the other. Just select any pad, which will then be reflected in the top left of the display. Opposite that is the pad's current tune or decay status. Hit 2 on the keypad, and you'll notice the status changed to decayed. Select any other pad, and you'll be able to alternate between the pad's tune and decay setting. Now, if you toggle the tune decay mode, now moving a fader doesn't have any effect on tuning, but now affects the decay length. This might come in useful with recording something like an open hi-hat sound that you can open and close in real time. And I might add that any decayed sounds will be denoted by an apostrophe above its tune decay value in the display. Next, we have the loop/truncate feature. This is what you use to trim the start and end of your sound, as well as configure it to loop. And for any newbies watching, there's quite an art to chopping samples. Sometimes you might choose to leave a little bit of air just in front of your kick or snare or hats or whatever, and that's to allow them to occur a little later than expected. So go ahead and experiment, because sometimes it's the little things that make a big difference. Anyway, jumping right in, you start by selecting a pad. You'll notice the bank and pad number change, reflecting the current selection to edit. Pads that don't contain a sound will be reported via the lower half of the display as empty. And in addition to that, pads that contain copies of samples will appear in the lower half of the display as copied and can't be edited either. Think of it as protection, locking the copied sample due to the fact it's shared, and therefore you'll have to erase all copies before you get the opportunity to truncate that sample again. And we'll cover how to copy sounds under the special menus section. So for now, select an original sound and hit enter. Now you'll see the bank and pad ID of the sound you're editing is reflected up on the right of the display. To the left, you'll notice the S equals 5 zeros. This is your sound's starting point, represented as a value. Below that, that's your sound's endpoint, or how long it is in numerical value terms. To the right of that is the length of your loop, which occurs when the theoretical playhead hits the end of your sound and loops back towards the start by this many samples in the L field, which evidently is currently set to none, or in other words, no loop. Faders 1 through 6 act as 3 pairs of adjustment levers for these 3 fields. The first pair adjusts the sample start. Fader 1 shifts in greater amounts, while Fader 2 shifts in smaller amounts. The second pair, Faders 3 and 4, reduce your sample end value from the top of the fader track downwards. Again, the first of the two shifts in greater amounts, while the second shifts in smaller amounts. Similar with the third pair, for loop length, Fader 5 moves in greater values, while Fader 6 moves in smaller values. As a suggestion, I tend to work with 2 faders at a time, massaging the values into position while re-triggering your pad, listening for changes. To put things into perspective, the SP records 26,040 of these samples per second. Therefore, the 2.5 seconds of maximum sample time is represented by this value here, the 65,090 samples. So, as a tip, if you wanted to cut your sample in half, but keep the first half, you'd pull the end value down to 50%. Alternatively, if you wanted to keep the last half, you can adjust your start value to roughly half that amount. I should also mention your finer faders don't move in singular digits like one may expect, nor will they move in any fixed amount either. You just chop as close to where you need it, or if you're not getting near enough to the start point you're after, try running the truncate feature by pressing enter on just the start or end value first, as this can reshuffle the deck and provide alternate values on the next visit to the truncate feature. But once you're done trimming your sample, press enter, and then you'll be asked if you want to make these changes permanent. If you hit yes via the keypad, the excess sample data before your start and after your endpoints will be purged. If you hit no, your newly adjusted start and endpoints plus the excess sample data are retained. And FYI, your loop length can only be as long as your end value. And if your loop length is set to any particular value, then you won't be able to reduce your end value shorter than your loop length. You'll need to reduce or even remove your loop in order to reduce your end value any further. As a tip, you can hold down note repeat and audition your sample being re-triggered in quick succession. And shout out to DJ Fangers for that tip. Next, in the menu at option 20, we have Delete Sound, which is quite self-explanatory. Running this option allows you to select a sound or a copy of a sound and delete it from any particular pad and in turn the SP's memory. You'll be asked to confirm the deletion, which you can respond yes or no via the keypad. At option 21, we have the first song step function. This feature provides the ability to start your song at a later step further into your song. And we'll get into song programming a little later. At option 22, we have MIDI parameters. Here you can specify a dedicated MIDI channel between 1 and 16 that the SP will use to transfer and receive MIDI information across. But in relation to that, I should mention if Omni is enabled, then the SP will accept MIDI data from all channels. So if you only want to receive MIDI on a specific channel, make sure you select Poly Mode via option 2. And I might just add to that, you can use the SP1200 as a sound module and trigger the internal sounds using an external MIDI keyboard or even some other type of MIDI device. Alternatively, you can use the SP's pads to trigger an external MIDI device too. And the SP can receive and transfer MIDI note information, including velocity, provided dynamic buttons at option 14 is enabled. And it should be said that the SP1200 pads send out MIDI note off messages immediately after you press down on them, which is referred to as a note on message. For some devices, such as the Akai S950 or the S900, this immediate note off message can prove a challenge. So if you're pairing up your SP1200 with an external sampler, then check out the dedicated clip on how to set up the SP1200 with the S900/S950. I'll leave the link in the description along with a diagram of pads to MIDI note mappings. The next parameter in this menu option is pitch keys, which if enabled by pressing S on the keypad, allows you to access 16 tuning variations from G#3 up to B4, giving you a way to change the pitch of your sound using keys on a MIDI keyboard, or potentially some other type of MIDI device. But as a note, if your sound is configured for decay rather than tuning via option 18, then pitch keys will trigger the various decay amounts instead. Last on the menu at option 23, we have the special menu, which is an extended menu of more specialized functions. By punching 23 into the keypad, you're presented with a new set of menu options that you can scroll through by moving the first fader. Once you've located a function, you can punch in its number the same way you would with any other module, so consider it an extension of the setup module. So first cap off the rank at option 11 is catalog functions, which recalls this list of options that you can browse using the first fader. You might run this option after using other special menu functions to re-see the list, as there's no physically printed special menu on the SP's panel. At option 12, we have clear all memory. This is the surefire way to wipe everything from the SP's memory. Just make sure to save any precious work before running this function. Option 13 will display a report of how much sequencer memory and sound memory is remaining. Option 14, Write SMPTE, can generate timecode via the SMPTE output on the rear of the SP1200. If you run option 14, the SP will immediately start generating SMPTE timecode via the rear SMPTE output jack. You can press run stop or enter at any time to stop the timecode. However, if you're in song mode with active songs containing segments, you can write in specific SMPTE start times for each song, which you can do starting from song mode, then enabling the sync module, then pressing 3 for SMPTE, then enter in your preferred frame rate, then punching in an 8-digit start time in the format of hours, then minutes, then seconds, then frames. Then pressing the sync module button to return to song mode. Then you'll notice your song awaiting the SMPTE timecode. And now if you run the write SMPTE command via special menu option 14, you'll notice it'll immediately start from your current song's SMPTE start time. And there's more on SMPTE in the sync module section. At option 15, clear sound memory, will erase all the sounds from the SP's memory, leaving any segments or songs to remain. Option 16, clear sequence memory, will erase all segments and songs from the SP's memory, leaving any sounds to remain. Option 17, copy sound, allows you to link a sound to another pad. Notice I use the term link, as these are not real copies you can truncate. Copies are linked to the original so that you can have, for example, 3 tom-tom sounds tuned differently. And that's because copies can possess their own tune, decay, and mix levels. But due to the fact that they link to a single sample, it does wonders for memory efficiency. If you're wanting to make real copies you can edit, there's a workaround you can check out on the ToneLab Quick Tips channel titled How to Edit Copies of SP1200 Sounds. Link in the description below. To run this function, punch in 17 via the keypad, select a sound to copy, then select an empty pad. And if you select a pad that already contains a sound, you'll be asked if you'd like to erase that sound first by hitting yes to confirm or no to abort via the keypad. As a tip, you might want to name your copies using special menu option 21. Name sound. Otherwise, the copy will adopt the original bank and pad ID, which can cause confusion later on. Check out the bit about naming under the program section for more on how to use characters. Next, in the special menu at option 18, we have Swap Sounds. As the name suggests, you can use this function to switch any particular sound with another in the currently selected segment. This may be useful in situations where you've already recorded a rhythm with a certain kick or snare, but want to substitute one of the sounds without having to re-record or edit the segment. And you do this via special menu option 18 by first selecting the pad you wish to change, followed by the substitute. Then yes via the keypad to confirm. So let's run that segment now. Okay, good. Next, at Special Menu Option 19, we have the default decay. This function changes the rate of decay globally for all sounds set as tuned, which by default are all newly sampled sounds, unless otherwise configured via the Setup module Option 18. You can increase or decrease this value using the first fader. By default, you'll find this value at the maximum decay length of 31. Next, at option 20, we have another function also based on the status of your pad via the Setup modules Option 18, Decay/Tune Select. Here we have initial decay or tuning, which allows you to offset the tuning or decay value for any particular pad. Essentially, this feature offsets the 16 tuning or decay mode values accessible via the vertical faders. If you shift the values via this page, you'll be offsetting your tune or decay values accordingly. In total, the SP has 32 available positions of tuning or decay. So this default value here of 16 is considered middle or center. As a caution, just be mindful that any changes offsetting these values will most likely impact previously recorded parts in your segments. Next, at option 21, we have Name Sound. Despite this being called Name Sound, you can actually name any particular pad, whether it contains a sound or not. Just select a pad and use the first fader to scroll through the list of numbers, characters and letters, using the arrow keys to move your cursor left or right. When you're finished, press Enter. Next option, 22, we have Dynamic Allocation. This can be useful in situations where you need your sounds to linger longer, rather than being interrupted by another voice, which is a common occurrence when two sounds occupy the same voice channel. Dynamic allocation pairs up the outputs to offer sounds a second voice channel to escape through, giving your sound a second exit, as it were, to avoid interruption. To configure channel pairs for dynamic allocation, toggle the status for each pair as either yes or no to enable them on or off. Then press Enter to proceed to the next pair. At option 23, we have Transmit Sound Dump. This is a MIDI transfer function that allows you to transmit your sounds via MIDI cable as system exclusive data, which takes about 45 seconds to transmit a single 2.5 second sound. Check out the clip on ToneLab Quick Tips, Transfer Sounds via MIDI, to see it in action. Link in the description below. The most important thing to be mindful of with MIDI sound dumps is that incoming sounds remember the bank and pad position they originated on. So if you're not sure what the bank and pad allocation was of the sound you're about to dump, save your work, as it may replace any pad and without warning too. The second caveat is that there needs to be a sound residing at the same bank and pad number of the incoming sound. But this could be a sample of dead air. So sample Sweet Nothing into a pad if you're needing a sound somewhere in particular in order to receive a transfer. And again, you can see this in action via the ToneLab Quick Tips channel. Next, at option 25, we have a cool little function that will reverse a sound. Just select a pad containing a sound, then confirm yes or no via the keypad. Now the remaining special menu options are exclusively for the Rossum SP1200. At option 26, we have the LCD control. Using the arrow keys, position your cursor under any of the primary colours labelled RGB, red, green and blue, and then toggle them on and off via the keypad's yes or no keys. In addition to that, you can use the first fader to increase or decrease the brightness. Alternatively, you can disable all three of the primary colours to disable the backlit lighting altogether. Option 27 allows you to create folders on your SD card, which we cover in the disk module section. At option 28, we have Update Software. You can find the Rossum SP1200 Facebook group, link in the description below, where updates are posted. And you can simply load the .bin files into the root of your SD card and execute this option here to update your firmware. Option 29, Receive Legacy Bank, is a function you use to import sounds and sequences from the original Emu SP1200 via MIDI. You'll need to boot the Emu SP1200 with this particular floppy disk that's included with the Rossum. I've got a detailed quick tip on this with the Emu and Rossum SP1200 on the ToneLab Quick Tips channel, link in the description below. Further on from there, we have the SD card reader firmware revision and the SP1200's main firmware revision. Next up, we have the programming section, which covers how to make segments and songs. So next, let's take a look through the programming section, which essentially is the SP1200's built-in sequencer. The SP's sequencer has an internal clock resolution of 24 pulses per quarter note, otherwise referred to as PPQ, and possesses a tempo range between 40.0 BPM all the way up to a maximum of 240 beats per minute. And the basic workflow concept goes a little something like: you put the SP1200 into segment mode, record and edit any number of parts, which the SP refers to as segments. Then those segments can be chained together in an orderly-like fashion in song mode. And we'll be getting into song mode in the next half of this section. Navigating around the SP1200 is a fairly simple affair. You might find the basic nature does have its quirks compared to what you might be accustomed to these days. But the quirks don't really prevent you from making good sounding rhythms. There's no tracks nor automation to concern yourself with, nor is there any undo feature. It's fairly brutal in its simplicity, but that can also be a blessing as it frees you from having to worry about so many things. You can find and manage your segments while in segment mode via the SP1200's display. The abbreviation SEG represents your currently selected segment, along with its own unique number, which could be anything between 0 up to 99. Ultimately offering you up to 100 segments to record your beats and melodies into, which you can access while the flashing cursor is below the segment number, either by using the arrow keys or punching a 2-digit number in via the keypad. To the right we have the current tempo, which can be changed a few different ways. If you press the tempo button, you can increase or decrease the tempo using the arrow keys or the first fader here, or punching in a specific tempo into the keypad as beats per minute, including a decimal place. And you can even tap the tap repeat button 2 or more times and the SP will calculate your timing as a tempo. Either way, hit enter when you're done and you'll be returned to segment select. By default, new segments are 2 bars long, and you can increase the length of your segment up to a maximum of 99 bars by using the copy feature. But as the SP's sequencer memory is fairly limited, there might be occasions when you need to be frugal about how much sequencer memory you're burning through. So as a tip, you can check out how much memory you've used while the SP's stopped, by visiting the Setup Modules Special menu, option 13, for the memory remaining read via the display. But getting back to segment length, you can also decrease your segment length by pressing the segment length button. And this provides you with a truncate feature that has the ability to shorten the length of your segments, but not just by measures of bars, but also beats, which may be useful in scenarios where you need to have a segment that finishes early or joins onto another segment with a different time signature. And you do that by entering in 2 lots of 2-digit numbers via the keypad, or use the arrow keys to increase or decrease the value in each field with the underlined flashing cursor, followed by enter. There's also a way to record the length of your segment in real time. Start with an empty segment, hit segment length, hit run, and now wherever you hit stop, we'll define the new length of the segment, and hit enter through both fields to exit. Then, if prompted, confirm using either yes or no via the keypad. If you try to increase the length of your segment, you'll be notified via the display to use copy to lengthen segment, and we'll check out how to copy shortly. But having just touched on time signatures, if needed, you can change the time signature of segments away from the default value of 4/4. But the thing to note is this can only be done prior to recording parts in a segment. So to do this, while in segment mode, with the SB stopped, select an empty or inactive segment, press time signature, and now you'll be able to define the first 2 digits followed by the second single digit via the keypad or using the arrow keys. The left-hand side represents how many beats you'll get per bar or measure, while the right-hand side represents how many divisions you'll get per beat. So, for example, if you needed 7/8 timing, I'd include any zeros via the keypad and punch in 07 and enter. Then 8 and enter again. The last thing you might want to consider prior to recording real-time is AutoCorrect, which is what many refer to as quantize. And what this does is shift or correct any notes that weren't played accurately to the nearest AutoCorrect division. So for example, a setting of 1/4 divides the measure or bar into 4 equal steps. And similarly, an AutoCorrect value of 1/8 divides the measure or bar into 8 steps. And a value of 16 gives you 16 steps per bar or measure. And there's 32 divisions or high res, which is the maximum resolution that the SB's sequencer can provide. And as mentioned earlier, is 24 pulses per quarter note. There's also these curious looking values with the letter T next to them, which are your triplet timing corrections. Triplets are generally used for 3-note rhythms, when normally you'd have 2. You can change the AutoCorrect setting as often as you like, and during record too. So there's no reason why you couldn't record a take with triplets against a take with non-triplet rhythms. And when mixed together, can produce a swing-like effect on those sounds performed with a triplet AutoCorrect value. So experiment with 8T and 16T to add a little swing to your snares, hats, ghost kicks, etc. Shout out to Lord Finesse for that tip. I should also mention that AutoCorrect also provides the rate of note repeat. If you hold down tap repeat with any particular sound, you'll notice the rate of re-trigger is following the AutoCorrect value. Plus, step programming also adheres to the AutoCorrect value, and we'll get into step programming shortly. For now, let's try recording a segment in real time, which is as easy as holding down record and pressing run. You should hear your metronome clicking in time with your tempo. Make sure your metronome volume is all the way up. If you still can't hear it, check your outputs and signal path, or alternatively, connect a dedicated jack from the rear metronome output directly into a channel on your audio mixer. You should also notice your run light will flicker off every time your segment loops back to the start. Segments will loop around indefinitely. That's a permanent fixture of segments. But you can just hit the run stop button at any time to manually start or stop them, or alternatively using a foot switch, which we'll cover at the end of this tutorial. Starting your segment in record gives you the ability to toggle in and out of record by pressing the record button repeatedly. While playing or recording segments in real time, you can engage and change the tune or mix settings for each pad. Additionally, you can hold down the repeat button, which will re-trigger whichever sound you hold down to the rate of the value set in AutoCorrect. There's also a foot switch jack on the rear of the SP1200 for tap repeat, which allows hands-free operation of the tap repeat button. And again, more on that at the end of this section. You can change the tempo, but just keep in mind, segments don't store tempo values. You can, however, store and change the tempo via song mode, which we'll get into a little later. I might just add that empty segments are pre-configured with 2 bars and a 4/4 time signature. If you try to play an empty segment, you'll most likely hear a short, abrupt beep, provided your metronome level is up. But if you find you've already got segments loaded after powering up your SP1200, which is quite possible, as the Rossum will automatically load the last loaded bank on power up. If you need, you can erase segments, check the segment LED is lit and the SP sequencer is stopped, hit the erase button, and then punch in any 2-digit segment number you wish to clear into the keypad, followed by confirming yes or no. In addition to that, you can erase everything from the sequencer memory by visiting the Setup Modules special menu, option 16, for the Clear Sequencer Memory function. Hit yes via the keypad to confirm, or no to abort. If you only want to erase a single sound from the currently active segment, you can do so by hitting erase, but this time hit the pad containing the offending sound, then yes on the keypad to confirm. You can also erase specific sounds from segments while recording in real time by holding down erase along with the offending sound as it passes by. Just be mindful that AutoCorrect can restrict the ability for arrays to remove sounds outside of AutoCorrect's measured divisions. So in other words, if arrays isn't removing the offending sound, change AutoCorrect to high res and then try again. And I might just mention you can access AutoCorrect as well as the first three options of the setup menu while recording. But check out the setup module section for more about those. Next, we'll take a look at the alternative to real-time recording with Step Program. So the alternative to real-time recording is step programming. Make sure the SP is stopped and press Step Program. And you'll notice the record LED light up, indicating you're now in record mode, but it's not moving. With Step Program, you can edit each step of a segment, similar to how slides in a visual animation are edited. And as mentioned earlier, Step Program works in conjunction with AutoCorrect. So consider an appropriate AutoCorrect value for what you may need to do, or however many notes you need to lay down. Then return back to Step Programming by pressing Step Program again. Your arrows here navigate you back and forth through the segment's timeline in steps that are equal to your AutoCorrect value, which just happens to be conveniently displayed in the far right of the LCD, along with the current step position you're on. The MS means measure, which is your bar count. BT means beat. So as you scroll through, you'll be able to access various locations in your segment based on your AutoCorrect setting. In addition to using the arrow keys to navigate through the segment, you can also tap or hold the run button to play through the segment continuously until you release the button. So from here, you can insert sounds wherever you like, and by simply tapping whichever pad you like. And you'll see bank and pad numbers appear in the LCD whenever you arrive at a location that contains one or more sounds. And I should add, you'll only see up to 4 pads that reside on whichever particular step. Any more than that, and a plus symbol will be displayed indicating there's more than 4 sounds residing at this step. One thing to be mindful of is the nature of the SP1200's simultaneous voicings. You'll only ever be able to hear a maximum of 8 voices, and that's if your sounds are well distributed via the setup module's channel assignments. If you're not sure what they are, then check out the setup module section for channel assign. So if you need to remove a sound from a step, you can easily erase them by navigating to any particular step in your segment, hold down the erase button, and hit the pad with the offending sound to remove it. And you should notice it disappear from the LCD. A couple of things I should mention are, while in step program mode, dynamic buttons are ignored, along with any fader adjustments. You literally will be using the fader settings of what you enter step program with. And something that might catch some of you out is when you have unnamed copies of sounds in your steps, they appear as the original bank and pad ID, not the ID of the copy, which can create confusion. So if you're trying to erase a sound that appears to be ignoring all your efforts to erase it, check your copies and your AutoCorrect. And you might have to go on a little bit of a search and destroy mission to find the pad carrying the copy. But you can also use Step Program for that very purpose, as a note or pad inspector to smoke out steps that have pads on them. And if AutoCorrect is set to high res, then all steps will be accessible to view. And in addition to that, you can also use Step Program to place sounds into position that normally would be too difficult to perform otherwise. For example, there may be times when you want to place a clap sound a little earlier or maybe a little later to where AutoCorrect would allow you to place it. With AutoCorrect set to high res, you can get into those hard to reach areas and place a snare just before or just after where a clap might be. In order to create a splat effect rather than two sounds snapping at precisely the same moment. Once you're done using Step Program, you can exit by hitting Enter or Step Program. From here, you can audition your segment by hitting Run, and again Run to stop. Now, if you wanted to copy or double the length of your segment, you can do so while in segment mode with the SP stopped. Hit Copy, punch in the number of your segment you wish to copy, hit Enter, then punch in the number that belongs to an empty segment. Alternatively, you can use the arrow keys with single presses or held down in either direction to scroll through segments automatically. Once you've found an empty segment, press Enter, and now you'll have an exact copy of your segment at the new segment number you punched in. In addition to copy, if you attempt to copy an active segment onto another active segment, doing this will unlock the append function, which then allows you to join segments together. And with this, you can also append a segment to itself, which essentially doubles your segment's length. And furthermore, the SP will ask how many copies would you like appended, to which you can choose anything between 1 up to 99. Hypothetically, you could append a bunch of segments together and arrange a piece of music without even visiting song mode, but segments do take up more memory than song mode, and memory is a precious commodity on the SP1200. Plus, avoiding song mode does deprive you of some great features you can add throughout your song. And one more tip, if you need to quickly get a read on the length of your current segment, hit the segment length button. And again to quit. As a side tip, if you punch in the wrong starting digit before hitting the second, you can hit the Enter button to cancel the entry. That way you can start again. Next up, let's take a look at how we can liven up segments using swing. While in segment mode and the SP stopped, you can press the swing button and you'll find the swing value for the currently selected segment. By default, swing will be at 50%, which ultimately has no effect. Using the arrow keys, you can increase the value to amounts of 54%, 58%, 63%, 67%, and 71%. Values of 67% are essentially what you'll get when using the 8th triplet autocorrect value, or the jazz pocket of where things really start swinging. I won't bore you with the technical side of swing calculations. Instead, I'll demonstrate what I found to be pleasant on the ears and palatable in terms of swing settings. Swing values do present different results against different tempos, and while there's no right or wrong, one setting that might sound great at 90 BPM may not be so great for 120 BPM, and vice versa. And with each rhythm, it will be a case of whatever you like or whatever complements your rhythm. What I've generally found, particularly with the SP1200, is that swings exceeding the 50% range may be a little extreme when using common tempo values. However, if you decide to double time your tempo, in other words, double the value of your tempo, and perform your rhythms in half time, then I generally find the swing values are all very much complementary and easy on the ears. But don't let me sway the jury. Experiment for yourselves, because sometimes an extreme swing setting is all it takes to start a new genre. It's also worth noting that any amounts of swing will be applied to all sounds in a segment, indiscriminately. But as swing doesn't affect downbeats, you'll generally notice swing on notes in between. Okay, so I might just throw down a quick beat here to demonstrate the different swings. And 50% swing. And now 71% swing. 63% swing. 58% swing. Now with 54% swing. And now throw the same beat down, but with double timing. Halve the autocorrect because the tempo is now double 120 beats per minute. And now listen to how these swing values influence the same rhythm. Now with 54% swing, 58% swing, 63% swing, 67% swing, and now 71% swing. And now back to 50% swing. Finally, for the segment section, we have the metronome settings, where you can define the time signature or how often the metronome's click can be heard. By default, it's set to quarter notes, meaning you'll hear 4 clicks per bar. You can turn it off or increase it all the way up to 30-second triplets. And last in the list, you have the click option. Which sends a 24 ppq click out via the rear metronome jack. This can be used to trigger and sync external devices to the SP1200. Whichever click option you need, select and press enter. And audition your click, first making sure your metronome volume is up, then press run. Next, we'll take a look through song mode. In song mode, the SP can hold up to 100 song arrangements. You can navigate to any song by using the arrow keys or directly punching in a song number via the keypad. Each song can have its own tempo set independently, which is worth mentioning because when you enter song mode, your segment tempo and mix settings are not replicated across. However, the good news is, unlike segments, if you save your sequences to disk or SD card, the tempo for each song is recalled when you reload your sequences. As a side tip, it's worth noting that any song played immediately has its tempo adopted by segment mode. This can also be used as a means to save your segments with their rightful tempo. To set your song tempo, select a song, hit record, insert any segment, hit enter, then hit the tempo button, insert the tempo, but then, and most importantly, pressing enter will save the tempo into that particular song. Now, if you exit song edit by pressing record, visit any other song, preferably one that also has a saved tempo, and you should notice them recall their rightful tempos as you select them. In terms of the song mix or fader positions, you can use the Setup Modules option 15 to import a defined mix. More on that in the Setup Module section. Essentially, song mode is where you wind up arranging and mixing your song. So first, arrange your song by getting your segments and maybe mixes in order. Then choose any of the 100 song positions and arm the record button to engage the song editor. Now add your segments in to each step by punching in their 2-digit numbers directly into the keypad. Press enter to lock in any step and repeat this process as often as you need. Then once you're done arranging segments, you can press record to exit the song editor and press run to play your song back and listen to your segments play in the order they were added. In addition to that, there's various functions you can use and add into your song located across these buttons here, which I'll run you through now. Starting from the right, we have mix change, which functions similarly to a MIDI program change event in the way that you can insert a mix change into your song steps and it will recall any of the 8 mixes that you can save via the Setup Modules Define Mix function at option 15. Check out the Setup Modules section for more about this function. This can be useful to recall various mix settings or fader positions throughout your song, which could be used as a basic type of automation. Next, we have tempo changes, which, similar to mix changes, can be inserted throughout your song steps and are used to increase or decrease your tempo while your song is playing. The way a tempo change works is fairly straightforward. You navigate to the step position prior to where you'd like a tempo change to occur, then hit tempo change to insert the tempo change step. You'll then be presented with 2 options, accelerando or ritardando. So select 1 if you'd like to insert a tempo change that speeds up, or select 2 if you'd like to insert a tempo change that slows down. Then, using the keypad or arrows, enter in a value as BPM that you'd like to increase or decrease your tempo by. As an example, if you wanted to increase your tempo by 10 BPM, then key in 10, then the second field is a value of beats as a duration. Or in other words, how many beats will it take for this tempo transition to take place? And here you can have up to a maximum of 32 beats. But as there's 4 beats in a bar, and taking my current time signature into consideration, this would increase my tempo by 9 BPM, but the transition would take 8 bars to complete. Alternatively, if you want a sudden change, leave this field at 0. Next across, we have delete, which you can use to delete a song step by locating the offending step and pressing delete. Any other song steps thereafter will be drawn down and inherit a lower step number. Then we have insert, which is the opposite to delete, in that insert will create an empty step and move all other subsequent steps up by 1, giving way for you to add another step of some sort. Next across we have end. You can insert the end step anywhere into your song, and this will declare the end of your song and stop the SP1200 from playing any further. If required, confirm yes or no via the keypad to insert the end step. Next to that, we have SubSong. SubSong is another interesting step you can insert into your song, as it instructs the SP to play any song at that given song number. Further to that, it can act as a repetition tool to restart your song. If you want your song to repeat indefinitely, insert a SubSong step and key in the same number of your current song. Whenever the SP plays through, it will hit the SubSong step and start from the beginning of your song. Ultimately, your song will be caught in a deliberate loop until you press stop. In addition to that, if you use it to play another song that, say, for example, only has 2 steps, then SubSong will play those 2 steps, then continue on through the course of the original song. That is, if there's any more steps left in the original song to play. In terms of repeats can be thought of like loop points. You can insert repeat points which wrap around segments or sections of your song, and then repeat as many times by any number you provide. When you insert your first repeat step, you'll notice a vertical line with a semicolon on the right-hand side, which depicts the beginning of your repeat section, and then inserting the second repeat step will close the loop, aka repeat, by displaying a vertical line with the semicolon on the left side. Then opposite that, there's a 2-digit value to delegate how many repetitions that particular passage is to repeat. I should mention there's a rear foot switch that can cancel the repetitions pertaining to this feature, so stay tuned for the foot switch section for more on that. Next we have trigger. This can be a very useful step to insert somewhere into your song because it's capable of generating 6 different click types via the metronome output. There's quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, right up to 30-second triplets, or you can even select click, which then generates a 24 pulse per quarter note syncable click. And some of you might be thinking, big deal, but these clicks are capable of triggering older synthesizers, drum machines, such as the Oberheim DMX, DX or DSX, the Emu Drumulator, the Emulator, and Modular Gear 2. So in other words, trigger possesses the potential to cue parts on external drum machines or synthesizers, and at various steps throughout your song. If you'd like to stop the trigger at any particular point, insert another trigger step, but this time set the trigger step to TR off. And I should mention that the SP1200 has to be running on its internal clock to generate the trigger. Check out the sync module section for more about the various types of sync. And as a couple of final notes, you can connect foot switches to the rear input of your SP1200 for a few different uses. If you're wanting to trigger the note repeat / tap button without using any hands, use a foot switch with a polarity option, so you can invert the polarity and then stepping down on the foot switch will hold the tap repeat button down and free up a hand. This can be quite a bit of fun and I'd suggest trying it out. I'll leave a link in the description of a suitable foot switch you can purchase from Amazon. Connecting another foot switch to the run stop jack on the rear of the SP will allow you to start and stop the sequencer by stepping down on the pedal. Next to that jack is the step / end repeat jack. So while in song mode, with the SP stopped, a press on the foot switch will advance to the next song number. And if the SP is playing a song, a press on the foot switch will abort any remaining repetitions that you may have programmed into your steps. And that's to say, ahead of the repetition it's currently in, basically allowing you to escape an excessive amount of repeats, which I can only imagine might come in handy in a situation where your guitarist just really isn't up to it, and by pressing on the foot switch, you can abort a plan to have any number of repeats and instead wind up the song. And then finally, there's one more function you can use with song mode, found in the setup module's option 21, first song step, where you can change the current song's starting step by using the arrow keys or punching a song step number directly into the keypad. And that just about wraps up this tutorial. In closing, I'd like to congratulate Sam and Dave, not the R&B duo, but at Rossum, on doing such a great job. This is a huge milestone for the SP1200 Legacy, and respect to the Rossum team for providing fantastic support. I've seen them operate in the forums, and I've got to say, they really do a great job looking after their community. And huge thanks goes to STUDIO OOMZ, who so generously loaned me this fresh out of the box Rossum. You can find STUDIO OOMZ on Instagram, link in the description, send him some love, and he might even loan you the unit too. just kidding. Anyone wanting ready-made sample packs for the SP1200, including the ones I've used in this video, can visit the sample pack store via tonelab.au. If you enjoyed the clip, give it a like, subscribe, and if you're feeling generous, tap the super thanks and flow some support so I can keep on making more videos just like this one. Those on Instagram, drop by for a look at Tonelab. And check out the Tonelab sub-channel over at youtube.com/Tonelab Quick Tips for more tips and tricks on the SP1200 and other classic samplers. And if you're wanting more deep dives just like this one, then check out the other videos on this channel for more comprehensive walkthroughs on various classic drum machines, synthesizers, etc. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.